Hello everybody, my name is Tanya and welcome to my December wrap-up. So my strange reading mood has continued through December, so it's been with me for a couple of months now, and that's okay. So my reading through December continued to be rather patchy, and yet somehow I've managed to finish 10 things for the month, although 6 of those were completed within the last few days of the year, and the ones earlier in the month were very small, so they're kind of all ways up, but still somehow I've managed to complete 10 things. Let's just get into it. The first thing that I finished in the month of December was for a read-along, and that was The Back Eye by Euripides. This is part of Jean at Jean Bookish Thoughts' Classical Read-along 2.0. This time around we're reading Greek plays, and the first one of those was The Tragedy. So I haven't read this whole volume, I only read the Back Eye from here, so one single play, which is only a short section at the end, so not very large. And I really enjoyed this. So I haven't read all that many of the classics. My main experience was the classic read-along last year, where we read The Odyssey and Odyssey Metamorphoses. And I've read a few things, but I'm not too familiar. This was the first of anything that I've read by Euripides, and so I was really interested to see how I would go with it. And as it turned out, as I said, I really enjoyed it. The translation that I read is an older one from Penguin and is translated by Philip Vellicott. I can't compare it to any other translation, but for my part I definitely found this one quite readable, so would recommend that as a fun translation to try. Anything by Penguin is generally quite good. This one is quite a short play. I read it in one sitting, and this is the tragedy of the pair, however I still found this quite a lot of fun. Yes, there's a lot of horrible things that happen in it, it is quite tragic, but at the same time I found kind of the byplay between characters and the way the story was set up to be really quite amusing. So it is not intimidating at all if you're kind of put off by the classics, thinking that they're going to be something that you can't comprehend. I think this was definitely a good place to start, and yeah, it was quite an enjoyable little read. So briefly, this one follows the god Dionysus, who is the son of Zeus and a mortal woman, but his mortal family doesn't recognise his status as a god, which enrages Dionysus, and he kind of exacts revenge by gathering kind of a cult of worshippers, as it were, and then he kind of roused all the females in Thebes to this kind of frenzy. This angers the men in the community, and things kind of go on from there, and bad things happen to certain characters, all through Dionysus being angered that he's not getting the status that he so deserves. I don't really have all that much to add beyond that, because I don't want to give everything that happens away, for all that it's classic and people are fairly familiar with the stories of some of the gods. But in either case, if the fact that it is a tragedy or that it is so ancient is putting you off, I definitely wouldn't let that hold you back from reading something like this. As I said, though it's a tragedy, I still found this rather amusing in places, and definitely very enjoyable, so I would recommend to try something, and just to read some more by Euripides maybe in the future. Next book I completed was an audiobook, and that was I, Robot by Isaac Asimov. This is the first book that I read by Isaac Asimov, and I really, really enjoyed it. I haven't seen the whole of the movie, but from what I understand, the book I, Robot and the film starring Will Smith really have nothing in common. So if you've seen the movie, the book is completely different. The book I, Robot is a series of interconnected short stories, all revolving around robo-psychologist Susan Calvin, and an interview that somebody's having with her, and kind of relating stories of robots in her past, and also all dealing with the themes of the 3 laws of robotics, those being, I'm going to read this off to make sure I get them right. Number 1, a robot may not injure a human being or through an action allow a human being to come to harm. Rule number 2 is a robot must obey orders given to it by human beings except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And rule 3 is a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. And so it kind of goes through different examples and different stories about different robots where the interpretation of those rules can get bent in slight ways, and Susan Calvin has to come in and kind of study as a robo-psychologist exactly where the literal meaning of the orders given to the robots as referenced against those 3 rules, and what the likely outcome in their kind of mind is to lead to this unusual behaviour in the robots. And I actually found it really quite fascinating in terms of, you've got this story about a robot that appears to be malfunctioning, but as it is, it's just following those rules based on the information that it's been given, and it's kind of this logic puzzle to work out if the order they were given is this is where the rules conflict, and trying to work it out, which, you know, I couldn't necessarily do so, but just I found that it really made you think, and I found it fascinating, particularly, you know, when Susan Calvin came in and was studying them to kind of get a sense of their behaviour, how it all came out to play out, you know, in the end. And I found it to be a really interesting, quite thought-provoking read, at the same time as being really amusing and fun, just as a storyline in itself. Isaac Asimov, of course, is a big name in science fiction and older science fiction, which I have quite a soft spot for, so I'm definitely looking forward to reading more by Isaac Asimov in the future. The next thing I completed in December was the next of the plays for the classical read-along, and this time it's The Frogs by Aristophanes. This was the comedy of the set, and this was hilarious. I found this to be a lot of fun. Again, I read this one in one sitting, and I laughed out loud, and it starts with a fart joke basically, and that kind of sets the tone from there. It's a bit of a, you know, look into what this is about. Yep, fart jokes, and off it goes. This one again features Dionysus, and this time he's decided he's going to visit the underworld to bring Euripides back from the dead. Euripides, of course, being the author of the Bacchae that we read earlier in the month, and you know, it follows his journey with his servant to reach the underworld. Then when they get to the underworld, they find that Euripides has challenged Aeschylus for the you know, place of top tragic poet in the underworld, and we witness the debate between the two of them trying to one-up each other in, you know, proving that they're the best, and it just was so much fun. I really enjoyed it. So again, you know, I said with the Bacchae, if you're feeling intimidated by classic literature, you shouldn't, but this one again is a really good place to start. This, as I said, it had me laughing out loud. Again, I've got an older Penguin translation here, this time by David Barrett, and again I found no problems with the translation, and it just pure joy. So I'm really pleased that I was able to complete the reading for the Classical Read-Along 2.0. However, I was absolutely horrible at actually participating beyond that, and I didn't make any kind of contributions to the Goodreads group, which was a definite shame. I kind of fell down. That was part of my whole reading thing. I wasn't doing a very good job at you know, communicating at the same time. But I did read the books. I really enjoyed them, and I'm so pleased that Jean organised to run round 2. Then there was a period where I didn't complete anything else really for quite some time, but the next thing I completed was a graphic novel, and that was the 3rd volume of Ms. Marvel, which is Crushed. I don't have that one here because I had to return it to the library, but as always, picture will be up here. I didn't enjoy this volume as much as I enjoyed the first 2. I had enjoyed the first volume, I liked the second one even more, and then this one kind of felt a little bit flat for me. There are a few different storylines in here, a lot of it focused around Valentine's Day and, you know, potential romances, which was okay. I enjoyed that bit the most. There was also a crossover issue with the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. graphic novel series, which I have no knowledge about, so that one kind of just went a little bit over my head, and I didn't connect with that in any way, so I, you know, didn't really take anything out of that. So I'm still interested in the story of Ms. Marvel, and when the next trade comes out, I'll probably pick it up and see how I go. But this one was a little bit more of a disappointment for me. But that's fine, I'm glad to have read it. And then again, I didn't complete anything for quite some time until it came to Holiday Booktubeathon. So I did a TBR for Holiday Booktubeathon. I haven't done a wrap-up, so it's all going to get included in this one because, you know, time and stuff. So the Holiday Booktubeathon ran from the 27th to the 29th of December. And so everything that I completed, so the next 6 things that I completed, were all finished within that time. So I think I finished 3 things during Holiday Booktubeathon on the 28th and 29th of the month, and then the 30th and 31st I completed 3 more things. So the first thing I completed during the Holiday Booktubeathon, though, is something that I'm super excited about. It's something I've been working on since October technically, so it's about time that I finished it. And then of course was Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke. This is my October Booktube Recommends book from the lovely Erica at Erica Abel, and I have just been dragging so long on this one. Every time I picked this up I was absolutely loving it. I just wasn't getting around to reading it or anything much. So I had the 3rd volume left during the Holiday Booktubeathon, so that one reached my goal of completing a book that had white on the cover, because the 3rd volume was very conveniently white. I read the entirety of that one during the first 2 days of the Holiday Booktubeathon, kind of rushed the end of this book, and I am so excited. So as always, I will do a separate review video of this one when I've gathered my thoughts, and at the moment I still have no clue what I'm going to say about it. I loved it, I adored it, but at the same time I just have no words. The next book I completed was for the challenge of reading a gift, and I chose something that I got for Christmas, and that was the illustrated Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. And I have been meaning to do a full reread of the series for a long time. I started a reread last year that conked out after the third book, so it's around time that I get to these, and this was just a perfect kickoff. The illustrated edition is stunning. So when it first was being released, saying that it was coming out, I wasn't too excited. Like, it was interesting, but more and more people were enthused about it and started hauling it, and just now that I've seen it and read it, it really is a work of art. The illustrations just make it such an even more magical experience than it already is. I think this would be a fantastic way to introduce it to a child who hasn't read Harry Potter before. These illustrations, I think, just really complement it perfectly, and I can't wait until they're all released. There's really not much I can say about this except I loved it. We all know, in general, the story of Harry Potter, and I just being back in that world and just kind of inhaling this amazing version of it was a wonderful experience. So love, of course. And then the third and final book that I read during Holiday Booktubeathon was for the challenge of reading a follow-up, and for this I picked the fourth book in the Animorph series. This is The Message. As I said before, I'm kind of throwing one of these in for every readathon I do at the moment, just to get me reading the series again, because I never quite finished it as a child. Again, this is fantastic. This one is introducing another character that becomes a big part in the series, so I was looking forward to getting that introduction again. They're quick and easy. It's it's interesting going back and realizing just how little happens in each storyline. Like, there's a conflict or something that happens in each story, but there isn't really much to each volume, which makes sense being the target audience that they're at and the size that they are. But when I think of Animorphs, I think of this really rich, large epic, basically, but I'm obviously thinking of the series as a whole, which is fine. Each one is a very small snippet in itself that come together to make this amazingly, huge, amazing, epic series that I loved as a child. So glad to get a little snippet down. And so that left a couple of days left in the year, and during that time, the next book that I finished was my Agatha Christie of the month. This time it is Taken at the Flood. This one is following the story of a family, basically. A young widow, Rosaline, marries an older man, Gordon Claude, who's kind of the patriarch of this family and the support, the kind of wealthy relative that supports all of his other less well-off relatives. She marries him, and then very shortly after he dies in a bombing during the Blitz in London, and as he hasn't made a new will, all of his money goes to his new wife, and so his family members who have relied on him and have been told by him specifically to rely on him for many years are finding themselves in a very awkward financial situation, and it kind of goes from there. I'm not going to talk too much about that, as I never do with the Agatha Christies, because I think it's best to go in rather blind, but I really enjoyed the setup for this. I really enjoyed the interactions between the different members of the family and Rosaline and her brother, and this one was shaping up like fantastic. I was really enjoying it. I was thinking it was going to be a new one that maybe merited the 5-star. I really loved it, but the way things ended, I wasn't quite so satisfied. Agatha Christie's definitely twist and turn a lot, and when you think you've got it, then it all changes again. But this one just twisted a few too many times for me, and I would have preferred it ended at an earlier stage. So that kind of left me a little bit surprised, but it's great that she can get to the point that she's still surprising me after all this time. So I definitely have to respect her for that. It just didn't quite turn out as amazing as I thought it was building up to be. Second to last book that I completed for the month, and one that I finished I think on the last day of the year, was an audiobook that I've been working on for some time, and that was Cloud Atlas by David Mitchell. I just randomly decided that this was finally the month that I was going to read Cloud Atlas, and I did, and it was fantastic. So several years ago now, I tried to start Cloud Atlas once before, and I don't think I got past the first, dozen pages or so. I found it quite difficult to get into, and I'd heard, different things that made it a little bit more intimidating, so I hadn't got around to it again earlier in the year I did listen to The Bone Clocks by David Mitchell, and I found it really quite easy and accessible, so I was feeling better to try this again. Also, Mercedes from Mercy's Bookish Musings did a fantastic author spotlight video on David Mitchell and his works that definitely make them a lot more accessible. It makes them a lot less intimidating, and I would highly recommend that you check that out if you have been intimidated by David Mitchell. I will find that and I will link it down in the description. So that list consists of 6 kind of interlocking stories, and so we start with one character and we go a certain period in their story and then kind of stop mid-sentence, as it were, and then change to the next one, and it goes on and on and on like that until we reach the middle story, which is told in its entirety, and then it starts going back the other way again. So we get the second half to the stories, or the one before and the one before, until we reach the outside again. And that whole setup of it was really fascinating. I really enjoyed the way that this was told. It still took me a little bit of time to get into the first voice, and so if you're struggling with this one, keep at it. Like, the first story that's told is told in quite an older fashioned style. It's quite dry. It was probably my least favourite story and perspective of the lot, so if you have started it and are struggling, just push forward, because there are different voices and different perspectives further that are a lot more readable in my opinion and a lot more worthwhile. The point that each of the stories end is just really frustrating, because you get into this kind of climax point that you really want to know what happens next, and then we'll switch to a new person. So when you get to that tipping point in the centre and start going backwards again and finishing the stories of each of the people that came before, it's incredibly satisfying, and I really enjoyed it a lot. And I'm so pleased to have finally read this. And so, do you remember that huge stack of library books that I brought home that I showed in my December TBR? And do you know how many of those I actually managed to read? But it's okay, they'll keep. I can renew them if needs be. They're still sitting here, I'll hopefully get to them. And so the last book that I managed to complete during the month was one of those books, and that was Hour of the Star by Clarice Lispector. And unfortunately, I really took nothing out of this at all. I only read it a couple of days ago. Nothing's really stuck with me. There isn't much of a plot to it as such. It's more an interestingly written piece. It's kind of our narrator watching somebody else and writing about their story, but they kind of have this whole introductory bit of, I'm going to write about this and I'm going to do that and blah 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 blah, and it takes forever to, the actual storyline to actually start, which kind of frustrated me. I wanted just a quick easy read, and this wasn't it, which is more of a reflection on me than it is on the book. On the back it describes it as slyly subverting ideas of poverty, identity, love, and the art of writing itself. Clarice Lispector's audacious last novel is a haunting portrayal of innocence in a bad world. And yeah, but at the same time, obviously, what I was craving and what I'm probably needing at the moment with my funny kind of reading is something just a little bit more plot driven and easy to sink your teeth into, whereas this was a little bit more kind of philosophical and something I needed to think about more than just devour. And so it probably, as I said, was more about me and the time that I read it and the thing that I was needing at the time, rather than a reflection on the book. But fairly, non-memorable in my opinion at the moment. And so there's the last book that I made a start on that I didn't get finished during the month, which is sad and a bit naughty, but at the same time it will be a high priority for January, and that is A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. This, of course, was my December BookTube recommends pick and my last one. I've made a start on this. I haven't got very far yet, but I am absolutely loving it, so I am hoping that I can devour this one soon, because I think I'm going to love it. So these are the books that I was able to complete during the month of December. Let me know what you thought of them and if you've read any of these yourself. As always, thank you all for watching, and I will see you next time. Bye!